Hey guys, welcome to the Hot Rod Hoarder YouTube channel. It was brought to my attention a couple days ago that Dennis Collins posted a video about a mysterious Shelby Mustang drag car that he just bought, and he's looking for information. So a couple of guys reached out to me and said, hey, you might be able to help him figure out the history on this very mysterious and very valuable Mustang drag car. So, of course, I'm interested in that. So I watched the video. And in this video, the one you're watching right now, I want to go over some of my observations. And, researching a car like this is not something that can be done in just a few days or a few weeks. It can take years to figure out the history of some of these cars and to really, determine the background. So I'm not expecting to, just flip over a few rocks and find something amazing. I know it's going to take time, but I wanted to go ahead and approach this in a timely manner while this video is still reaching a lot of people. It's gotten over 500,000 views already just in less than a week's time. So, this is a very popular car. It's a very popular YouTube channel and a very popular guy. Dennis has bought and sold a lot of very iconic cars. He's been on the Fast and Loud TV show. He's a very well-known, very well-educated car guy. And, this car, just to give you a brief rundown if you haven't seen the video, this car is very mysterious because it has no VIN, it has no badging on the inside, no tags or anything like that, no numbers, no title. It's a drag car that's been cut up, and, the hardcore Shelby guys are just cringing because this is an extremely rare and extremely valuable car that's been cut up and turned into a drag car. And, for me, I'm not a Shelby expert or a Ford expert, but I do love drag cars, and I do have a pretty good understanding of this era of drag racing. So let's get into this. I made a few notes here after I watched the video. First note I made was that Dennis Collins, his YouTube channel, and what he does is he typically has a coffee in his hand, so I grabbed mine in my Hot Rod Hoarder coffee mug that you can buy. I've got it in the merchandise area down there. I also have these hoodies if you like that sort of thing, t-shirts, all kinds of stuff. Anyways, yeah, that's good. Okay, so when they start walking around the car, the first thing I notice, the first thing I observe about the whole car, just the overall picture of the car when they uncover it, is the amazing patina. And patina is, people love it. People love to see originality. And I guess part of my speculation on this car right off the bat is, can that be real patina? I don't know. I don't know that for certain, but I do know that when this car was bought, it had flat black, either spray paint or some kind of not so great paint job on it. So the words they used were they wiped off some of that paint, and this white paint was underneath it, and the stripes and all that stuff was there. And, I don't want to argue or speculate or say that they're trying to trick anybody, but that is tough to believe, that you could just wipe off that paint and then you'd magically have this Shelby GT350 with the stripes and the perfect patina and the little bit of surface rust and a little bit of primer showing through. That is my first observation is, wow, that patina is almost too perfect. So let's carry on here. Another detail that really stood out to me, and I'm not trying to bash this car or any of the research that they've done, but the first thing, aside from that patina that I saw, was the FFX designation on the windshield. Now, there could have been a track or maybe a sanctioning body that had the class FFX, but it is not common. It is not something I've ever heard of. Now, just to give you a little background, the FX would be factory experimental. And that was a class that NHRA had in the early to mid 1960s. And it eventually sort of evolved. The factories got really aggressive. They started bending and breaking the rules, and they actually created, out of the AFX class, they created match race type cars, and that turned into funny cars. So that's where some of the confusion comes in. FFX was not a thing. In NHRA there was AFX, BFX, and CFX. It was based on the cubic inches of the engine, the weight of the car, and you were classified as such. AFX would have been a big block car most of the time. B and C possibly would have been either a big block car that was heavy, and then CFX was most definitely a small block car. So anyways, that's actually a moot point, because by the time this car hit the track, which is reportedly 1969 based on the date code on the fuel injection, by the time this car hit the track, factory experimental wasn't a thing anymore. That had already kind of run its course. It had come and gone. And by 1969, if we're talking about AFX and the evolution of that into match racing and funny cars, 69, it was full-on funny cars. One-piece fiberglass body, Logie chassis, things changed very, very quickly in the 1960s. So a car like this, it's a 67 model. Some of the date-coded pieces, especially that fuel injection system, which they're basing a lot of the history of the car on that fuel injection system. So if it was a 1969 piece, that kind of hurts the argument that this was ever even close to being a factory experimental car. So my feeling on what class would this car have run in if it wasn't an FX or an FFX class, would be an altered class. So if it was running a 289 based engine, even if it had been bored or stroked or whatever, it more than likely would have run in a C altered class, or maybe even a D altered class, just depending on the cubic inches, the weight of the car, that sort of thing. And again, by 1969, when this car was supposedly finished, the altered classes, even those C and D altered cars, they were not just factory looking cars. They were very cut up. Like, this thing is cut up, but the typical C and D altered cars were like really gutted and just not factory appearing like this. So, that raises some questions. That class designation, not sure really the history behind that. I'd love to know more. So that was kind of a red flag to me. We talked about the Hilburn injection 1969 date code. If you look on the order form when they're showing it on the video, it shows that it was ordered by Erickson Speed Shop, which is in Chicago, which definitely plays into the history on this thing as far as being a Chicago area car. That definitely adds up. But what doesn't really add up is the dates. So 67 car, 69 fuel injection, resulting in a car that would have been largely outdated in any class it was running in, aside from C or D altered. Okay, moving on. The next thing that I noticed when they were talking about the class designations, because Dennis kind of set them straight. When he was talking about the big blocks outrunning the small blocks, Dennis kind of, he let him know that the NHRA split them up by cubic inches. So, that helped that big block versus small block issue to be resolved. But again, they keep talking about factory experimental, and I just don't know how accurate that is. One of the things they mentioned in that conversation is that it likely wasn't an NHRA car, and the words they used was that it looked like an IHRA type car. And I'm using air quotes because there really was no way to tell the difference between an NHRA car and an IHRA car. They both had different types of classes. But the real thing that sticks out to me is if this car was built in 1969, it wouldn't have run in IHRA because IHRA didn't exist yet. So another piece of that puzzle is the US 30 sticker. You'll notice that it's not actually stuck to anything, it's like cut out. I guess they pulled that off of the original windshield. And my first thought on that is that it appears to be one of the reproduction decals from the 70s and 80s. I don't know that for certain, but it does not look like the old school, late 60s type of decal. So, that could have just been a sticker that somebody stuck on there. I don't know that for certain. But what I do know is that US 30 was an AHRA sanctioned track, which the AHRA was known for some weird class designations. They had all sorts of classes, especially in like the late 60s when all of those different classes were changing so quickly. AHRA had just dozens of class designations. So the FFX, maybe somewhere down the line that this car fit into that. But not to my knowledge, not to my, to my limited amount of research on this particular car. It doesn't look like a class that existed. So moving on from that, let's see here. Other details that I noticed while they're talking about this car are the side scoops, the brake scoops on the quarter panels. Those are held on with like hood pins. It's got 2 pins that hold those on. I'm really curious about that. I'm curious as to why those would need to come off for any particular reason. And I don't know how they were attached from the factory. I don't have any type of knowledge on Shelbys or Mustangs in general. So, if you know why they would need to have quick access to there, feel free to leave me a comment below. And honestly, on any of this, if you got any kind of information on this car, or Shelbys, or Mustangs, or US 30 drag strip, AHRA, if you have any type of information on that kind of stuff, leave a comment below. I love to learn. I love to learn about old drag racing and old drag cars. Let's see. Additional details. The roll bar. Okay, they said several times in the video that it's the original roll bar with the original welds. And again, I've not seen the car up close. I wouldn't even know what I was looking at because I don't know Shelbys. But when they mention that, and the camera shows a nice shot of the additional roll cage bars, the factory roll bar would just be the one piece that goes up over your head. But the additional roll bars, they're all covered in roll bar padding. And that foam padding would have disintegrated over the years, even if it was kept in a climate-controlled area. So it looks like that's been replaced, and they've done a good job. It looks nice. But I guess part of my speculation, part of my concern there is it seems like they're just trying to hide something when you do something like that. If you're trying to show the originality of the car, you wouldn't put something to cover up the originality. That's just my opinion. But it does look nice. The roll bar padding, all that stuff, everything that they've done on this car looks nice. So it's got that going for it. The originality of the car is kind of what I'm questioning. Again, there's so many questions on this car, and the more I look, the more I think, the more I study on it, the more questions I have. So some of the speculation, some of the potential scenarios with this car, because it brings a lot of questions as to why would you do this to a Shelby, especially considering that there were Shelby drag cars and there were factory Ford produced drag cars in the 1960s. If you were going to go drag racing with a Mustang in the 1960s, you could do that with a factory Ford big block, very nicely equipped car. Now you had to have connections. They were very limited production cars, but you could do that. So we're taking a Shelby, even back in the day, these were pretty, it was known that this was a special car. And somebody's completely cut this thing up. I mean, they've cut the floor pan out of it, the firewall has been cut out, the shock towers, the entire front frame rails, they're all gone. Everything is gone. Anything identifiable is gone. The only thing left are the original leaf springs, the original 9-inch Ford rear end housing, and the original body panels as far as the roof and quarter panels. The doors are fiberglass and the one-piece fiberglass front end. That's not Shelby stuff. That's aftermarket stuff. Now it is period correct. It's all good stuff. There's no question about that. It's all good. It's all old. It all goes with the history of this car. But there's not a whole lot of Shelby stuff there. Now what they did do a good job of is documenting the pieces that were existing, the Shelby pieces like those leaf springs and things like that. But there's still just some questions there as to how this car came to exist. And there's two possible scenarios there. The first one would be, was the car wrecked? The car could have very well been wrecked in the front end, could have been, just junk, could have been in a junkyard somewhere, or whatever the case was, it could have been wrecked and then they cut the front end off and built a race car out of it. That happened to a lot of cars, a lot of Corvettes, a lot of very special cars, special edition type cars like this Shelby got used as race cars after they got wrecked. So that's a pretty likely situation. The car got wrecked, then it turned into a race car. The other possible scenario was that it was stolen. Cars were a little easier to steal back in the day. You could steal it, cut it up, nobody would ever really know. And in this case, it's not trackable. There's no VIN, there's no tags, there's no title. It's just a cut up race car. So, their research as far as bringing it back to that number 1444 car, I don't have any leg to stand on to argue with any of that. As far as I know, all of their research would be accurate. But what I'm concerned with is just some of the originality that they took off, like the black spray paint or whatever that was on this car, and the patina that's now on the car, that part doesn't add up to me. The magnesium wheels, they said they changed out the Keystone wheels off the back and put magnesium wheels on the back. Those are pretty correct for the car. The M&H slicks, those are correct for the car. The only thing I didn't see that was correct was the Hoosier front runner tires. Those are modern. But largely everything else is correct for this car in terms of the period. Now that doesn't mean that they're correct for the history of this car, the actual documented history of this car. The goal here definitely isn't to try to prove anybody wrong or to call anybody out. The goal is to truly find the history of this car. That's what I love to do. I love finding the history of old drag cars, and this is a perfect example of a mysterious car that doesn't have a lot of history. At this point, it's still unknown. So that's fun to me. That's enjoyable. That's something that I'll really sink my teeth into and hopefully come up with something. That's always my hope, is to come up with the truth and the most accurate way to tell this car's story. If you've watched any of my other videos, you know that I want to do the car justice. No matter if it was a car that was built in the backyard, a crudely built dragster, anything. Any kind of old car, I want to be able to tell its story and do it justice. And that's what I'd love to be able to do with this car. So, I'll dig into it, I'll look into it, and I will see what I can come up with. And obviously I will report any of my findings to Dennis, and hopefully someday down the road we'll figure out the history of this mysterious Shelby GT350 drag car.